All
Settings?
What's that?
I'd like to call the meetings of the Ocean Shore Planning Commission to order. It is 2 o'clock on February 27th. We're in the Ocean Shores Library in Ocean Shore. Roll call. Larry? Here. Thorne? Here. Gary?
Here,
Here.
Tom? Here. Mark? Here. I'd like a motion for the approval of the meeting agenda.
I make a motion.
Motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Do I have a motion for approval of the minutes?
I'll make a motion.
Do we have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
I have a change or an addition, actually, I'd like to make to the minutes. I was remiss last meeting when I introduced Chris from Blue Zones at our meeting, and I did not, say his last name was Fry. So if we can add Chris Fry, Frye, to those minutes, and then we'll be set.
Do we need to vote on the change?
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the minutes with the change?
Motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Approved. Any public comments in the room today? Yes, sir.
Are you coordinating with the city as far as the biking and walking trail? They had a town hall recently, and some items were discussed.
Yes, we are actually, and I'll address that later, but, yes. So we have, well, I might as well just say it right now. We have a, public meeting scheduled in this room on the 19th of March at 6 p.m. to go over the results of the survey that we did through December and January. In addition to that, Gary and I have the pleasure of being on a Zoom call with the Parks Department. And we shared those results with them, and Gary was good enough to get 5 of our projects on the Parks Comprehensive Plan
Very good.
going forward. So we'll officially give those results on the 19th at 6 o'clock in this room. But yeah, we're moving forward. You're welcome. Any other comments? Any comments from afar? Oh,
She's
you're muted.
Hi, thank you. Vita Piera has no comment.
Hey, thank you. Gary, any comments? That's Mark's attempt at humor. Never mind. Okay. Okay, we'll jump right into membrane structures transmittal. Gary, you want to discuss that? Pages 4 and 5 for those of us that are following along.
yeah, on this, I had sent to the mayor because the mayor happened to give me a call about a week and a half ago. And at that time, he had told me that there was a chance that membrane structures may make it to tonight's city council meeting as a discussion issue. So what I thought it would be is I thought it would be prudent to have the mayor and council informed as to our discussions and Vita's wonderful input as far as the IBC and all that sort of stuff. So I just drafted this memo. I don't think there's anything that isn't in our minutes or wasn't discussed, but I just wanted to sort of give the mayor, and if it went to council, where we had discussed, and basically everything that I put in the memo was everything we had discussed. I gave him the background from the IBC, thanks to the work Vita had done during comment. And then I had basically discussed that as we had never made a motion, but we had sort of reached consensus that it would be possible for city council to consider making membrane structures a conditional use. That way they go through the public hearing and all that sort of stuff. And 4, which is on page 5, item 4, I said basically, really it's the things that we sort of were waiting on or paused on, I guess would be the way to describe it, was there's a clear understanding as to why the building official felt they were prohibited, because for us, we really, was working on the whole temporary structure thing. And then it was really up for the mayor and the city council to discuss how they felt about ethics. So it sort of saw this as a back to you, mayor and city council, on membrane structures. And if you want us to look at drafting changes to the code, we're willing to do that, but we really need some figuring out of where the city government wants to go. I'm open for discussion here if anybody wants to add anything.
Any comments?
My comment is, I don't have a problem with his membrane structure, because one, it is a non-flammable membrane. If he did anything as far as bringing it up to uniform building code, he needs to run conduit and put GFIs in there. Because he has secured it down to a concrete slab, and as far as the aluminum structure compared to what they allow over in Westport, and what they had, and how they secure it to the gravel and sand over there, has lasted four years now. And he made it through this last winter, which had some pretty hefty storms come through here. Other than a couple upgrades, and it's cohesive to people that wanna bring dogs, with no other place here. And it seems as though, from what I read, an awful lot of people in Ocean Shores have animals, and it's enticing for people to wanna go to.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. We'll see if they provide any guidance or wanna move forward on that, and we'll take it from there if we get guidance.
Yeah, and before we leave it, I just checked, it did not make it tonight's agenda. The interesting for us, if we're on the agenda, the only really interesting thing for us on the agenda is they're gonna have a discussion instead on Point Brown sidewalks, which we've talked about. And again, just a discussion. They've got a pretty full agenda with some other things they need to do. But they are gonna look at Point Brown sidewalks again. So I'll try to listen in. It's kind of hard for me to stream into that because I'm not on the cable, but I'll try to listen into some of that on what they're doing on sidewalks.
Okay.
The second item is a draft, and it has not gone to the mayor yet. This is sort of inspired by Thorne. Thank you, Thorne, because I went through all of my records as things that we had transmitted and hadn't been acted upon, or things that we simply hadn't transmitted, but we had actually voted at some point. And many of these predate most of your time on the planning commission. What I wanted to do is sort of walk through this, and I really we don't need to do a motion, but I'll sort of look for a thumbs up consensus if you think this should go forward. First thing is, all the way back in December 2022, we had suggested a clarification on the 40% rule. I think this might have come up with something on Marshall, where Marshall had basically tried to interpret our intent. But basically, if you look on 2A, what we had proposed was revising the language of 1750 210M of the municipal code to say no residential or combination of buildings permitted on an otherwise in a residential zone, so it shall exceed 40% of the lot area. And that emphasis was added. Because way back in early 2022, we put the 40% rule in, and then we went back and clarified it on, this only was intended to be applied to residential and not commercial. Any discussion on that clarification?
Any comments? No comments on this end.
All right, good. The second thing, and actually, Thorne, you brought this up, and what I found out is we never transmitted it. And this is the minimum square footage rule. So basically, if we start on page 7, which would be page 2, I think, of the transmittal, we basically said we wanted to make single-family residential zones 650 square feet everywhere. So basically in 1750.210.d, which has got this fairly confusing table that is still in effect, that says, you know, divisions 1 through 9, 650, 10, 11, 800, 12, 650, except trailers. So I don't need to read through all of this, but we thought that was a little bit arcane. And there was long discussions about this, and a lot of you guys weren't here. But a lot of it was, is people at the time, we felt back, and this goes to the covenants, as no one has informed us, that people were trying to avoid beach shanties, which was sort of a thing in the past, but people nowadays aren't buying lots and doing beach shanties. So second with that is that there are really no good need there. What the discussion was in the group, and I think you guys could remember all this, is that nowadays there's some pretty good looking 650 square foot homes that can be built out there. And it's not an unreasonably small square footage, and it would allow some greater opportunity, especially in some of the interior lots, for some more, I want to say affordable, attempt at middle housing. You know, you can get a smaller interior lot for, you know, 15, 25,000, then build a home for 100,000, and it's not all that bad for a 650 square foot home. So that's sort of the thought on this. So any discussion on the 650 everywhere?
Probably a wire.
All right. So the second thing that kept confusing me, and I know we went through this, is basically this 1750-210E, where the current code says a more than one-story dwelling shall have a minimum main floor area of the main structure, exclusive of open porches or garages as shown in the above schedule. In addition, shall have at least a combined total floor area exclusive of open porches and garages of 1,000 square feet. So basically, if you were building a two-story structure in divisions 1 through 9, you had to have a total of 1,000 square feet, which would mean if you wanted to have 650 on the second floor, then you would have to have the residual 350 on the first floor, plus a garage. What this in effect has done is it has sort of prevented the fear or the thought that people could have a 650 square foot garage, which is a large garage on the first floor. And then on the second floor, a 650 square foot prime main living area. We discussed this at length, and at length we said this really didn't make sense. You know, nowadays, at the time, the Planning Commission was of the opinion that this also was sort of arcane and not needed anymore. So basically, I had an enclosure which had the revision, and I'm going to refer you guys all the way down to page 9 of the agenda, because we never did this before. We never went through and said, what would the new code look like? So on page 9 of the agenda is what 1750-210 would look like. We have already talked about getting rid, we would basically say this would not apply to multiple dwellings, obviously, to row houses and other common wall residential developments where we know that goes on. But we did say, in addition, no dwelling shall be permitted on any lot where the main floor or the main structure exclusive of is less than 650 square feet. Then we would strike out the table. And then I went round and round on paragraph E, but I still see a need for it. So this kind of prevents the 325 square foot over 325 square foot tower. And remember, this is an architectural standards section. So it's as close as we come to saying this is sort of what your house can look like. And at the time, there were other members, and there's a few examples in this town that are pretty weird looking, where people have done some pretty narrow, skinny houses or additions. So what E, as we've read it, basically says, a more than one-story dwelling shall have a minimum of the main structure exclusive of porches of 650 square feet. So basically that says the footprint, even if you're going 2 stories, still has to be 650. What this does open, though, is the 650 square foot garage on the first floor and the 650 square foot living space above. Or if you cantilever, a little smaller garage, 500 with 650. So discussions on how I've sort of recommended interpreting the planning commission's recommendations into code, please.
Any comments? I like it the way you wrote it.
I think it's very much in line.
Yeah. Oops, we froze for a minute.
Bill, and I think E does address that.
Okay. Thorne, do you think it's gonna work for you? Is this
Sure,
what you were
yeah.
looking to get?
At least consistent.
Yeah, exactly. And
Well,
it
you wouldn't mind
states,
also.
Yeah.
One thing this does not include is, unless, I think we're taking the term division or subdivision out, so it will now include Willow and Rain Street too, which the former table did not.
right, and it does, and so, it would be, the question would be what it would do, and I guess, it would be, there's only that one place left, because we rolled all of those divisions into the R1 zone. So I think we'd be okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All righty. And then, any more discussions about the minimum square footage?
No,
Uh,
I believe
the
so.
last thing we never did, we sent it, but it sort of died a death of, other business, is all of the work we did on transient rentals. And I don't know how many of you guys were here when we went through all of that. We looked at multiple municipalities and other folks. And when we worked really hard at putting together what I thought was a good updated set of code that did several things. First, it reified, it solidly went back and so it's known, but the fact that you have to do a business license and pay LTAC, which I think it's clear, but we wanted to put it right in the code for transient rentals that says, if you have a transient rental, you must pay, you must get a business license and you must pay LTAC. And then we went through all of this stuff about local property representative, alternate property representative, fire safety, occupancy, parking, and all that sort of stuff. So for those of you that need to read it, I'm gonna go ahead and just wait a minute or two, Mark, because this may be new to a lot of people on the call. Were you here when we did this, Mark?
Yes,
Okay, so there's a couple members that didn't go through all this with us, so I'm gonna give them time to read and ask questions. Because at the end of this, my goal is to have somebody make a motion that I go ahead and translate this either as you guys want to change it or as is to the mayor. So please, you guys that haven't had a chance to read it, we're gonna take a couple of minutes and let that happen, okay, Mark?
absolutely. The part with the transit rental starts on page 12.
Oh, maybe you're.
You're welcome. And the business license discussion is on 13 going forward.
There wasn't any changes on this one.
Yes.
I go down to the bottom of page 14.
And just to be clear, I know you guys are gonna finish up reading, this was already heavily worked on and approved and by motion approved by the planning commission back on the date I stated. I just wanted, before we send it, give new members a chance to review what we had done in the past, and if anything comes up, we're always open for ideas with the new members.
Gary?
It's relatively draconian, but that's okay. Go ahead.
Well, it gets a little complicated here. I'm kind of uncomfortable reading it quickly. I don't remember what we read before, honestly.
Yeah,
We could
this is
maybe-
exactly what we did.
Yeah. I wouldn't object to one more week of looking over this.
Okay, we can bring it up at next meeting. That's fine by me. It's an easy document. And I want to get it right before we send it up. And I think last time, Thorne, please do that, but I think you recused yourself from voting last time,
Right.
That's right.
which
We have-
we understand why. What?
We have a couple of them in there. I just want to make sure there's no contradictions here that are gonna confuse people later on.
Yeah, I understand. And I felt that was also important that we get this because we keep talking about in a logical way, expanding opportunities for transient rentals in current multifamily zones. So we might as well get this straight as we're doing. So at the same time, it came to my mind, but
We discussed this before we discussed the upgrade, yeah.
yeah. And the last time I brought this before council, I was approached by two different people after the council meeting saying, "You're not gonna let transient rentals in my neighborhood, are you?" So that shows you the residual passion against transient rentals in some of the R1 areas.
What jumped out at me in reading this is that if I own 3 transit rentals, I need 3 business licenses.
Yep.
Yep.
I can't just, under my name, have a business license for
Can't
transit rent. You can't blanket them. They have to be specific, so that jumped out at me.
I mean, but that is,
I like that, actually.
and it's, and one of the reasons was because if these, and I guess it's on E2, where it says owners operators of transit, three, owners of multiple properties in permitted locations. The discussion we had back then was, these could easily be sold and transfer. So the thought was being that having each property under the franchise rule, because we did that research that said these would be considered franchises under the state business, under the city business license rule, that if we considered each property a franchise, each franchise needs a separate business license. And that was if they get sold, transferred, or do whatever, is really what it was about.
Larry?
Yeah, under B, I may be misreading this, but if you take out, it's got obviously a long list of items like owner, person, entity, then occupy, use, but since there's ors, couldn't this be read as no owner shall occupy?
What was that reference again?
Couldn't it, in B, where it says no owner, person, or entity shall occupy, use, operate, rent, or lease, nor offer or negotiate to use, lease, or rent a dwelling. But I understand what the point of the sentence was, but since those are all ors, doesn't it, if you could shorten it up to no owner shall occupy a dwelling in the R1, R2, R3, R4, R5?
Yeah, we weren't looking at, that's existing language. And that goes back to the, gosh, I don't know when the date was, many, many years ago, when there was an attempt to expand transit rentals under all sorts of different things, that in fact, they came back with, must have been 89, that they came back with this language. Well, I was not, what I would say is, Larry, for this transmittal, I would prefer to leave the existing language. But as we get back to rewriting 1750 altogether, we can look at it then.
Okay, but I'm just saying right now, if that's the way it is, it means an owner can't use his own property.
No, that's not what it said.
Yeah.
the way I read that, because of all of the commas and the ors, it means no owner can occupy. And technically, which leads into our next item as transient rentals, if it's just a house, that means you basically are saying no owner can live in their own house.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we,
Or transient rental, that's what it says. It
But a
can't
transient
be-
rental, but a transient rental can be now defined as just a house.
yeah.
Correct.
And I'm not sure where that original language came from. But we'll look at it again and see what we think, but we're gonna do this next meeting again before I transmit it, so.
Gary, I talked to the chief of police a little while ago, and she would like to see the word advertise in that paragraph as well.
Okay, we can add that. In fact, you brought that up once before. Into which paragraph?
B,
B, okay. The prohibitions. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'll look at this, but we could basically say, we could delete occupy. And say, everything else would cover that issue, and we could add, advertise. And that would allow the city to go after people advertising illegal transit rentals, which is a question of, it would clarify their ability to do so, right? Okay.
Well, yeah,
I understand that the issue with the word occupy. If we're gonna change that, we can go ahead and delete occupy. And, I'll look at cleaning that up, and then we'll add the advertise to put some teeth into the ability to find people, because as we know, there are lots of people still advertising transit rentals in those zones where they're not supposed to be. And then we'll clean it up again, because all of those terms go away. Because, the R1, R2, R3, eventually we hope to recommend they all go away. And that could simply, that could be clarified as to RL, RM, and RH. That would be it. So, all right.
Anything else? Okay, let's move on to hotel.
Well, before we go, Thorne, can you think of anything else I missed? Those are the big ones. I mean, I spent a couple of hours going through all the minutes and all of my stuff. I couldn't find anything else that we missed.
no,
It was good.
I don't know, I draw a hand, no.
Gary, the only thing I can think of is we had a very brief discussion, who actually, I think it was pushed back from council on sizes, minimum or maximum sizes for storage sheds.
Yeah,
think-
yeah, and that, I don't know what happened to that. I mean, that was fully set up and we actually did the language. So I think that's in code.
Okay, I wasn't sure if it was or not,
Got missed, yeah.
yeah.
Because that was actually, I think, approved by council.
Cool.
Okay, that's right. All right,
So move on to the next agenda item, hotel, motel, and short-term rental definitions. Larry?
yeah, this was, kind of leads in from what we just talked about. It's pretty straightforward that the transient rental would be considered less than 30 days. Anything over is more than 30 days. I think there was a time before the Airbnbs that we would usually we wouldn't think of a house as a primary residence turning into a transient for less than, well, by definition, a transient, which makes that comment that I made on the last one. I think that's what reflects that, is that I don't believe that they were thinking of someone's primary residence, then all of a sudden not flipping to being a transient rental.
Or renting a room out in the house.
Yeah, it's 10, 15 years ago, I mean, that wasn't even a thought that that was gonna be the case. So, motels, hotels, and bed and breakfasts are pretty well defined. For the purposes of what we were doing this for whether it be in the tourist areas or commercial and such, my suggestion in the summary was just that we would be specific to say that it's a transient rental. And by that definition, meaning the 30 days or less. And if we made it specific to that, we're just kind of reversing what we do with the R1s, where we don't want anybody actually having transient in R1s. Flip that, we actually want transient in this, so we don't want regular residential. That's basically what I came up with. There wasn't a lot of ambiguity with the definitions. And for what we want to use it for, we would just want to be very specific as to say that if it's going to be, I mean, I doubt we'll even allow single family residents, it would probably either be a duplex or multifamily, but that we literally say that it has to be transient. That way it would avoid any permanent residents.
But who's gonna hold them accountable, because I know for sure there is one facility here that has those that rent rooms out to multiple people over a long period of time, and who in code enforcement, or who's gonna hold them accountable, because the type of individual it attracts.
And I also thought about that too, because I actually started in that summary to say something about like triplexes and the rooms within a triplex. Because technically that would be, I took it out because it basically came back to, if it's under 30 days, it's still technically 30 days, unless somebody wanted to live out of their suitcase and like hop from room to room to make it so that it stayed true to transient. That could happen, like if you were in a triplex or fourplex and somebody just, there was an understanding with the ownership or something, that could happen. It's a lot of hassle and I doubt it would happen very often, but that did come up about the rooms, like if it's a triplex or a fourplex or fiveplex or whatever, and the room, but then again, that's still encouraging transient there. The only reason it would turn into a long-term tenancy would if they were getting around the rules by hopping from room to room to room. And that might just be something that somebody's gonna take that much effort to do that. I don't know if we can regulate it all the way down to that.
And you just hope that with some of the renovations that's going on a couple of them facilities over there, that it'll change what is staying there right now.
Yeah, I think when Marshall had made it, cause it didn't dawn on me that they were making duplexes and triplexes specifically for that, putting in the fire hydrant or not, the sprinklers and stuff like that. So, but again, that would also have to be addressed. That could be something else that could be added, that if it's a transient, then that would be the part where if it's considered, you can only have transient, and then that would kick in, I think, those rules, where if it's only transient, then you have to have these certain safety features. And that may be either a deterrent, but that would probably be a good deterrent, because those who do it would actually truly be looking to have transient rentals in that area, which is what we want. That still goes towards.
But you gotta look at the fine line of transient and transients.
Right. So, yes, and that's, although, yeah, I don't think that's our conversation. I love to have that conversation, but it's probably not ours to dictate.
Are we talking about B1 and B2 or other things?
This originated from what we were gonna talk about with B1, B2, and then also maybe even the corridor, so it kind of goes with all of that. It wasn't anything in specific, it wasn't for any one of them, but it was meant for the commercial areas and possibly the corridor.
Many people have built private homes in B1 and B2, which they rent out from time to time. Would this prohibit that?
I think it depends on if basically the 30-day mark, that would really, I think, come down to, is it 30 days or less at a time?
Or,
That, at least by definition.
let's say you could not live in a transient rental, is that what you're saying?
Essentially, if it would go over 30 days, it's no longer considered transient,
What
then it would just be rental.
if you want to rent out for 2 weeks, for instance?
2 weeks would be less than the 30 days, so then that would be like a transient, or if you want an extension, you mean, like 30 days and then an extension? I don't know, see, that would be another weird one. That's a question. That would be another.
Part of the issue we've got is our code uses the term transient rental, and I've got to pull it up again and look. Where the state of Washington uses the term short-term rental. And that's where it gets really confusing, is we've been around this many times, as to our code and some of the other city codes that we looked at use the term transient rental, and I'm trying to pull it up right now as I'm scrolling through the code, the beauty of being not at
Yeah,
the
those
thing.
things here may help
Yeah.
that are in
So-
if you're looking at it electronically.
So our city code uses the term transient rental, where the OSM, where the state uses the term short-term rental. And we went around this a lot, and I forget who was on it as when we first started this on what to call it. Because the state also uses the term transient to sort of define hotels and motels. So there's using the term transient rental. Maybe we need to go back at some point to using the term short-term rental as opposed to transient rental. I don't know. It'd be a huge change. The thing that comes up, and we're gonna start talking today about B1, B2, is what I like and what you found, Larry, is that I know it's really hard to get there, is the short-term rental is a lodging use and it kind of uses it by exclusion. It's not a hotel, motel, or bed and breakfast, and it's a dwelling unit. And so it's sort of, the state goes to it's not a hotel, motel, it's not a B&B, but it's used for short-term rental. Other definitions are sort of a residential dwelling used for short-term rental. But then you start getting into trouble as to if it's a residential dwelling, can you enforce the need for sprinklers and all that sort of stuff? So it's still a mash, and I'm not sure we've got a real way forward on defining short-term rental / transient rental, hotel, motel, and whatever else. I think we have lodging house in our code still, which is kind of an archaic term. And we're not going to solve this today, and we can beat it around and talk about it some more. But pretty soon, we're going to start going through the definitions, which is up in the front part of Title 17. And that's where we're really going to have to start hammer these out as we start going through the definition sections of Title 17. But what we've got going on, and we're going to still talking about this, is we have what clearly is hotel motel in both the state code and our state law and our code, that being you know where they are, the Sands and the Old Gitche Gumee Ocean Shores Inn and Suites, that have a serious use for long-term rental. They're being used a lot, and in fact, there's a specific drive at the Sands to make it a long-term rental. What we need to sit down and think about is, as we go through these definitions, is as we're defining the downtown corridor, we're basically saying we want to get rid of all residential. However, we've got these places like the Sands that are converting to 30-day rentals. So, you know, we need to really, and this is something, again, we're probably going to need political guidance on people's thoughts and stomach for saying, no, we want to keep the downtown corridor as hotels, motels, which, you know, one definition of those is less than 30 days. And we want long-term rentals in the other areas of town. It's a hard thing to do, but it's something to think about as to what we want to do, because we're sort of changing the character of hotels and motels and making them apartments, really, is what we're doing in the case of the Sands.
Yeah, Gary, you're exactly right. That's where we got really hung up last time, because I think it was one of the commissioners that's not with us any longer brought up, but that's kind of the natural state of hotels, right? They'll start as a hotel and maybe eventually end up being long-term rentals when they convert out. But I think the start of that could be the end of basically the tourist district down there along Ocean Shores Boulevard, because then they'll all start doing it. So I think we do have to think long and hard about that.
And the Ocean Shores Inn and Suites is not, and I don't know what the ratio is, but they do have a significant number of monthly renters in there. I don't know what the ratio is, but there's a lot. You don't see it in many of the other hotels. I don't know what happened to that one that just got sold on the corner there of Ocean Shores Boulevard, if that's staying short-term or long-term. But, you know, one of my original thoughts is by definition, a hotel motel is less than 30 days. And then a hotel motel and short-term rental / transient rentals is less than 30 days, and anything other that's long-term rental but now we're starting to grow long-term rentals in our downtown corridor.
Marshall, does that change in many?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there, is before a hotel, motel, short-term, or more than 30 days, before they can alternate back and forth between those two uses, they have to get a change of use evaluation from the building and planning departments, because there are specific things that change when you go from one type of use to the other. One of the, on the front end would be like parking. Your parking for a motel only requires one space per unit. If you were to change that to a long-term rental and rent by the month, then you would have 1.5 spaces per unit by code. So that we do require, and then if you're going the other direction from monthly to short-term, then you have sprinkler requirements, other types of access and safety requirements from the building code. So Roy and I do gang up on those folks and run them back through the code to make sure that the direction they're going, whether they're going from short-term to long-term or long-term to short-term, that they meet the respective sections of the code for each.
And what about
What has to be done?
Without looking at it, I don't know off the top of my head. I know that's just one of the things that we look at.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
what about the
Eric?
case? What about the case of something like Ocean Shores Inn and Suites that is basically doing 30-day rentals, but it's not considered a long-term rental because it's sort of mixed in there. I guess that's still considered a hotel motel. It's just people are renewing every 30 days. Is that the best guess, Marshall?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't remember talking about that one. I think they started doing that prior to me coming into planning, so I'm not sure if the previous planner reviewed that for parking or other requirements. We do have like the little the units behind the credit union as you come into town. Those are permitted as a mixed use. They're set up to where all of them could be used for short-term rentals, but they have enough parking to be able to use, I think, 3 of them as mixed use, which would be long-term if they chose.
Those are the ones behind the Star.
Yes.
And maybe that's the answer. Maybe we could allow them, like by the sands and everything, but say you're only allowed a certain percentage to be long-term,
I was thinking the same thing.
right?
I
That
mean,
could
these
help.
are
It could
all
help,
good
yes.
things to discuss, but in the case of the Sands, this was sort of a business decision by them because they weren't renting them as overnights, and there was a burning need in town for longer term rentals at a reasonable rate. What I'm not sure about is, and this is something that, either somebody can look at or think about, is what is a reasonable or code required ability for food preparation, storage, and all that sort of stuff if this facility is going to be a long-term rental? Is it a single burner hot plate and a mini fridge? Or do we want to basically say that we want to, if the code doesn't, and I don't even know where to start, if the code doesn't say this is the minimal you have to have as far as food preparation and storage, do we want to say we think this is the minimal we should have? And that comes to mind, the Sands, because I've never been inside the ones that are getting turned in the Sands. And I don't know if they're expanding the kitchenettes in there or what they're doing.
Yeah, Gary, there was a spot in here where it said, lodging unit being self-contained unit, and I tried to find out what they define as a self-contained. And there wasn't any consensus, there wasn't, it was so ambiguous as far as, what self-contained is, which kind of goes to what your point right there is, that, what does that mean? What was that, like, has a bathroom? I think that was the closest you could get, was that facilities, necessary facilities, which would essentially be a restroom, had to be in the room.
Self-contained.
Cause so that was like the closest. It didn't have anything to do, or I couldn't find anything that had to do with food storage, et cetera, but that doesn't mean it's not. But I ran into that problem, that the bathroom was the only thing that really was, that made it self-contained versus not self-contained.
And I, believe it or not, I think somewhere in our code, believe it or not, we talk about that a little bit. And let me see if I can find it. And I think it comes under the dwelling and dwelling unit, where the definition of what we have for a definition of a dwelling, maybe not. It's basically our definition of a dwelling unit is one or more rooms designed for one family for living and sleeping purpose and containing complete housekeeping facilities for one family. So whatever that means. So
Yes.
our definition of a dwelling unit says you must have complete housekeeping facilities. Great, that doesn't help a lot either. But, you know,
Does
my
he-
thought was, when you go from a hotel motel, you're going into a dwelling situation where people are actually living there. And I don't think it's a bad thing to have a discussion about what we think the minimum standard should be for somebody that's gonna be living for more than 30 days somewhere. Discussions on that?
Does any of this have to do, or does it make a difference if some of these ones with the condos that are renting them out? Like the owners of the condos that rent them out, but to the layman, it looks like it's part of the hotel. But it's actually condo owners renting their units out? I mean, cause then are they, are the condo, I mean, I don't know this, I just know that. Actually, the whole reason I came up was because I was looking at it, renting places for people to come visit here. My wife was going, well, those aren't really hotels, those are actually like each one in a condo unit and they dictate what they wanna do, and I'm like, well, that would make a problem, cause are we now gonna dictate to them that they can only do 30 days at a time? Or are we allowed to dictate to them as owners 30 days at a time if they want to do, 60, 90, 6 months?
No, I think that in general, if they are not in a B1 or a B2, they're only allowed more than 30 days right now. So if it's a condo that's in an R1, R2, that's being done as a less than 30 days rental, it's not in accordance with our code. And the 30-day cutoff we've kind of lived with. And Marshall, do you have any thoughts about that, as what we were sort of talking about as the housekeeping and the ability to prepare and serve food and all that sort of stuff?
I would like to follow up with Roy on that, because I think there are some minimum square footages identified in the building code for
Oh, there are.
certain aspects of a dwelling.
I know there are for that.
And so I don't know if a kitchen is defined as having minimum cooking capability or, food storage capability, those kind of things. But I would be surprised if it doesn't have something, when you go from a, transient type lodging to something that has to sustain, family life. I don't know that it necessarily requires laundry facilities or whatever, because you've got laundromats, that'll take care of those needs, but, I think cooking and cleaning, facilities are probably rolled into that, so I'll follow up with him and see what the code says about that.
And I think that's important, because this may or may not continue to be a trend, because as some of our hotels start to age out, there may be, and there's a demand for long-term rentals in this town, especially in the summer. We may be facing this more and more often. I just think we need to keep it straight, right?
Yeah, it's not gonna go away.
Yeah,
That's-
and I know you and Roy have been working really hard on making sure the sands is done right, which is great, because it needs to be done. And then we're gonna always have that sort of straddle area where you've got the backside of the old Gitchagumi, Ocean Shores, Inn and Suites, where it does have a kitchenette and people are renting, but they're not signing contracts. They're doing 30 days at a time. They're getting a 30-day rate, and then they just go back and book the room for the next 30 days. So it's a little different than what I think the Sands is trying to do, where they're going in with the intent of making that entire structure long-term rentals. So it's sort of a monthly rate in a hotel versus a building that's intended to be a long-term rental. Does that make sense to everybody?
Does.
Okay. Alrighty, so we didn't, Larry, I mean, thank you for all that work. We didn't really come to a solution, but I think we'll continue to beat this around as we go through the definitions. But what this does do is, cause, I am gonna actually miss the meeting after next, and I think that's when we're gonna start hitting definitions hard. So that's sort of a good lead in to go through the definitions section with everybody. So I think it's work that has to be done, and then we can kind of go from there. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, so the next thing is the purpose, guiding principles, challenges, and proposed zones on page 17 through 22. And Gary, I think these are just put in there. I don't think anything changes until we get down to 20, where it includes the Gateway District.
Yeah, so the only thing that really starts to change is on page 19, which is we start talking about the proposed zones, and this is sort of the handy dandy table for everybody. I just, in this table, want to reflect the fact that 6B and 6C, we're gonna get rolled into the RL. So that's all I did, and you see that in highlight.
Yeah.
And then also on that page 19, item 6, where we said in high density, we said single family or duplex only where the site is restricted. So that's sort of in the summary table. So
Yeah.
then, on the next page, page 20, we get to the fun. 8 is the Gateway District. And then I didn't realize we had a resort tourist that we've never used. And then there was these things that we've never really talked about. B3, and then I threw in item 12. Because what we've talked about, that's sort of preserving the few acre size or approaching acre size lots, half acre size lots for purely commercials. It's the old vision of, maybe someday somebody will want to build a grocery outlet or a Walmart or something like that. And so coming up with a zone that is highly restrictive that says commercial use only. And we got to do some work on that language. And then the existing zones, private recreational, public recreational, and open space, which are rarely used. But you see open space and public, but we don't need to make a lot of changes to those. So we'll talk a little bit about and everything from Gateway District through commercial retail. We'll start that discussion today, but that's going to be some of the hardest talks we've had. Starting on page 21 is the pivot table that talks about where they went. I've added 6B and 6C going into the RL. And as you scroll down on page 21, they're sort of no longer there. And then retail commercial, basically B1 becomes a gateway corridor and retail commercial. B2 general commercial. We had talked about that, and we'll talk about some draft language for no new residential 2 years after enactment. B3, I looked very briefly at our existing code, which isn't bad. It's actually pretty good. And added transient rental, and then the other ones are no changes. So are we ready to roll on, Larry? I think we're ready to go, Mark. All right.
I think so, page 23.
Okay, rolling into the Gateway District. We voted on and we had a motion on what we wanted to see in the Gateway District, but we never really wrote the code. So it's kind of, this is a reflection in code language copied heavily off the B1 as to what we had all talked about and voted on. And I didn't provide our document we had voted on in there, but basically the purpose is exactly as we did. The permitted uses, basically we said new one-family, two-family, multifamily dwellings are permitted only in the second floor of a building with commercial use on the first floor in the Gateway District. It's standing language for the marijuana retailers. Accessory structures, no big changes. And then what we added was under prohibited uses, it had camping and other temporary housing. We added inoperable vehicles, storage containers, storage of construction materials, and overnight parking of construction equipment. And everything else is sort of from the B1. So, do we need time, Mark, for people to go through this, or how we want to handle the Gateway District recommended zone?
Did everyone read it, or do you want to go through it now?
And we can bring this, and I'm perfectly willing to do this at the next meeting and voting on it then. I bring it up for two reasons. This of the ones we're doing is probably the most germane, because in addition to the Point Brown sidewalks, there's also a ad hoc from the city council on just this issue, Gateway District. So if we, at the end of the next meeting, can come to agreement on this language, then we can transmit it, and those folks working on that will probably ask us for some help, but we can send this and say, here's what our thoughts of taking our code and carving out a section of town and calling it the Gateway District. What we don't have in here, and I'm gonna look for it again, is transient lodging.
And Larry's got a comment, Gary.
When it, from what I understand for the Gateway Corridor District for its intended use, would we want to have any residential, even if it's the second floor of a commercial?
We had thought,
Well,
we
but it says
put that at length.
two-family and multi-family dwellings are permitted only on the second floor. So that line there, the new stuff, like, do we want to even allow for any new buildings with any residential if the point of the Gateway Corridor is more for tourism?
this discussion came from a couple of different areas. One, in modern, and this actually comes right out of the comprehensive plan. This residential on the second floor only. That's what the comprehensive plan had. And when the comprehensive plan was being developed, it's sort of considered a modern, mixed use, acceptable, walkable concept for a downtown.
I understand that. I was just thinking though, but that's not tourist. There's a difference between mixed use and kind of for, if you were for full-time residents and mixed use and stuff. But specifically for this Gateway District, specifically, we have it so that it's, you know, for mainly for the visitors and tourists. I mean, I get that. I don't mind either way. I just meant if we're focusing on tourism, then that mixed use that a lot of new downtown areas have, where it's commercial on the bottom, residential on the top, sure. And that also allows for extra, you know, housing and so on and so forth. But tourism is a different focus, because do we want to have in the middle of a tourist district having families and the kids running around for possibly, and you know, all those type of things? I throw that out there because of the tourism angle only. That's all. It's just because of the tourism angle only.
And as we were looking to get to the end of the comprehensive plan, I think the answer was both.
I was just gonna say that, maybe what we need to do is look at Ocean Shores Boulevard as the tourist zone, and the rest of it, the gateway.
And
Then we need to define that very specifically.
And by the way, the other point of that was the homeless services as a conditional use.
You don't want that in the
And
tourism.
not in the tourism, no, I mean, I hate to say it that coldly and bluntly, but
But you don't.
from a tourism standpoint, no. We don't want,
You don't want it on either corridors, because that's gonna chase people away from the motels.
yeah, so I figured one, definitely tourism, but yes.
Yeah.
as I understand it, the city went through a bunch of legal hoopla to not appear to be overly restrictive of allowing homeless services. But I think we could take the leap here. And I'm willing to take that out because we're said basically it would probably stay in, because you gotta have it somewhere in the B2 and the rest of the B1, but we're saying in the Gateway corridor maybe isn't appropriate for homeless services. Is there sort of a consensus around the table? We'd like that removed as a conditional use in the Gateway.
I would take it out personally.
Okay,
And I do think that somebody, actually, I don't know who said it, but you know, if we want to kind of do a mix of commercial on the bottom. I could see benefits of saying back to the transient, short-term rental for the top. Cause they would almost force people to actually be where they're gonna spend their money. They're actually literally going to be right there, just like we want them with hotels and so on and so forth. As long as we have ADA compatible buildings, which I'm assuming that would be the case, so.
it would be. And Larry, and there, the other thing that came back, because we were talking about this, is there's actually a lot more of this than you think that's there right now on Point Brown.
Well, yeah.
Above Octopus Crafts, there's long-term rentals. Thorne's familiar with the building you and I looked at across the street, Thorne. They've got apartments above them, all three of the other buildings, right?
Yeah.
So there's multiple situations, and Larry, I actually agree with you. I think if we add transient rental, which is just missing from here, as a permitted use, then that's probably a pretty good use, and it makes fixing some of those buildings a more attractive proposition to somebody where they can put a shop on the first floor and transient rentals on the second floor.
And their income,
Yeah.
their income streams for the building.
And then you've got Burlap and Lace where she's got 4 or 5 transient rentals out back. So that's not a first floor, second floor. Technically, she's in the Gateway corridor, but it'd be pretty clear that, and those are nice transient rentals that are in the Burlap and Lace out back. That's clearly a continued use, which I think is of benefit. The other thing is 1, 2, 3, 4, I think there's now 5 I've counted, single family homes, believe it or not, in the Gateway corridor. I think all of them but the old, I guess I don't know how to describe it. It used to be an old wine tasting room or something. So the one I'm talking about, that brick mid-century, all the rest of them are definitely transient rentals right now. The ones that are on the ocean side of Ocean Shores Boulevard, there's 2 or 3 over there. Those are all transient rentals. The one I don't know is the one as you're going around the corner on Ocean Shores Boulevard, headed out of town. On the corner there, that brick building, Thorne, is that being rented or is that a residence? Do you know?
Last I knew, it was a residence.
You mean the old winery?
Yeah, the old winery.
Yeah,
Can't remember the guy's
Joe
name.
Cove is there.
Yeah.
So there's an argument that with this change, there's 2 residences that aren't being used as transient rentals, but what we've said is no new construction. So basically, as long as the people stay in it, it can stay as a residence. But if it's gonna be, I don't know what the rules are. I guess, I don't know if it's sold, if it can stay as a single family residence. If we say no single family residential or not, but there's still two that I know of, and the one across the street next to the, right across from the moped rental place, Ocean Shores Boulevard, is also not rented out. It's a house.
Thanks, Dave.
So I think we have 2 residences that aren't being used as transient rentals. I don't know what the impact of this change would be on them. If at time of sale, it could no longer be, it would have to be transient rental. I just don't know.
Well, there's a lot of residences in Ocean Court too, right in that street. We don't know what they are. Converted hotels, condos now, residences though, however.
Yeah, okay. Well, I just want to bring that up, is that add transient rentals as permitted use. I think we have consensus on that because it's missing. Right now, the way you can do a transient rental is you find where it's not prohibited in Ocean Shores. So we also have a piece where it's an R1 through R9 is prohibited. So the assumption is you can do it everywhere else. So what we're trying to do is say it's actually permitted as opposed to being it's not prohibited. And so I think adding to transit rentals here, does everybody agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want to start using the terminology short term?
And then,
Yeah.
and then we took some of the accessory structures, and if you want to scroll down, you can see what we took out of the B1. So on page, where's the accessory structures? There they are. We took out residential garages, carports, private workshops, greenhouse, and all that sort of stuff. So we took out anything that was like residential and pulled that out of the gateway.
All right there.
So
He's 28.
So, all right, any more discussion about the Gateway District? And I will make that one change, and I'd like to get this back for vote, because this probably, because we actually voted on this, but never wrote the code. This probably needs to get transmitted with the option of council adopting this far in advance of all the other code changes we need to make. Because there is a general consensus, there was definitely on the planning commission, there, I believe, still is in council, that we want to clean up the Gateway District. And we felt this was sort of a way to start towards that. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah, let's plan on voting on this next meeting.
Yep, let's finalize it and then transmit it. Okay, and then it can go to council whenever they want.
Right?
Go ahead.
Gateway is only Point Brown and Ocean Shore Boulevard.
Yeah, we defined it, we defined it as Point Brown Boulevard, basically to where you're sitting. Really, I think we might have included the church. And then we said it was Ocean Shores Boulevard down to, down to the Polynesian, which makes sense. That's the old B1. And then we said Chance Lamar. We ran it all the way up to the post office, but we'll talk about that in the future. Some of that may become this highly restricted commercial only. But originally, that's where we said Chance Lamar, basically from Ocean Shores Boulevard through the Rotary up to the post office.
Well, there's two things that concern me, and this would have to do also with B1 and B2 in general. And that is, these houses on the gateway area would be non-conforming uses, right? And if so, if they burn down or something, what are the options of the owners? Number one. Number two, insurance. I'm not sure how insurance would cover these kinds of things. The other thing that's a concern is these lots are quite small in general. And the reason people didn't build business buildings on them before is because there probably is much demand for them. So what do they do with their land if they plan to build a house? I don't know. But maybe more commonly on Mount Olympus and Division 15 and 20. What do we tell those people who wanted to build a house, bought it for that reason, now they can't? But they can't build a business either because it's not worthwhile to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely what we're gonna beat around and figure out, but that's where we've done that a few other places. And, you know, we took very care to say no new construction of. So existing can stay. I just think that's something we're gonna have to all sit down and talk about and see. And again, it's what do we recommend? And I think the real issue that you brought up is probably the best one, is one, A, the house burns down, God forbid, or B, it becomes the point where they've got to tear it down and rebuild. What can they do on those few residential lots in that zone? And I think we counted a total of 5 at one point with houses on them right now. So that's sort of where we're at. We sort of tried to circle it to avoid them, but there's a couple that were built. I mean, the ones on the west side of Ocean Shores Boulevard are 1965 era. They've been there a long time. But between the motels, you know, the one we're talking about, Lauren? The winery, I think, was in the mid-70s. So that's been there quite a while. And then that other residential way up, right before you leave town on the left side, I don't know how long that one's been there. But those are the only ones that come to mind that are sort of existing single-family homes in that area.
And because this would be a change to basically zoning, wouldn't there have to be a public hearing on it anyway?
Oh, yeah.
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 So I think we get feedback just with the public hearing on what's happening. It would certainly give current property owners that haven't done anything with it the opportunity to voice their opinions or concerns.
And in there, we put 2 years, right?
Mhm.
After
Yeah.
implementation.
Yeah.
Well, not here. Here we didn't. Here we said no new. Because
we
there
said-
was, the thought here was there are so few undeveloped lots in that gateway district that the potential of somebody having purchased a lot in that area and intending to build a house is pretty low. The
Yeah,
bigger is somebody that's owned a house there since the 70s.
it is a zoning change, but we don't have to advertise to each owner, we have to only post it. So the owners who own property there probably don't live here, wouldn't have any notice of it.
True. I mean, you're right, we don't have to notify them.
If you're doing a
There
zoning
still
change.
have to be a public
If you're
hearing.
doing a zoning change within a particular neighborhood, we've got to notify everybody within.
Correct,
300
not a
feet.
conditional use type of thing.
Yeah, but here,
Public hearing.
we just post a notice in the Daily World that nobody in South gets, of course. And that's it.
I don't know, I mean, Marshall, is that true on how this would happen if we wanted to do this?
Yeah, I can't speak to that right now. I know the 300-foot radius would apply for spot zoning, changes, because we've gone through that a couple of times. But if you're gonna change an entire area, it might require that you do send out a full mailer to every property owner.
I don't know. We'd have to find out. Maybe the new city attorney can help, huh?
Well, I tell you what, I've got some work for that person, so.
No, and I'm not kidding. And this, really,
Yeah.
this particular one, which once we can kind of grind this out of creating the Gateway District, I think is a great sort of precursor to float before council and the legal staff and the city staff, other than Marshall, to say, listen, guys, this is one of 14 districts we're looking at tweaking. And let's sort of walk through this one a little bit, because A, there's an appetite to do it on council right now. B, we on the planning commission have felt we needed to clean up the gateway, the gateway corridor. So then all these sort of questions can sort of get flushed out as we run this one ahead. Does that make sense?
It does.
And so, and this is one that is, everybody at the time on the planning commission agreed we wanted to do. In fact, we were asked to do it by the old mayor, and we sent it, but it sort of died and it never went anywhere as we changed leadership in the city. So with a new mayor and a mostly new council, this is a good opportunity, if they're willing, to sort of dip their toes into the water of this sort of stuff. All right. The next one is the B1 zone. And I know you guys are gonna have a lot of stuff to go through this, and we're gonna go through all of these at the next meeting, and I'll be there in person. But I'm gonna start kind of on page 25 and roll through some of the minor tweaks I looked at. One of the things I thought about was, and I didn't do it here, is if you look at it, if you carve the Gateway District out and see what's left for B1, one family, two family, multifamily dwellings. We could recommend multifamily dwellings only. I know that's pretty radical, but I think next week we'll talk about that a lot more, and I'll bring the maps and we can go through as to what the impacted areas. But then, as we were discussing earlier, right now, the B1's down by the jetty, where we've got single-family residents used for transit lodging. So, on one hand, we say, as you look at sort of the area interior to the Point Brown Ocean Shores Circle is the best way to describe it. There's a lot of apartment buildings in there, and that's a good thing. because they're close to services and that sort of stuff. So there's an opportunity in there to say multifamily only makes a lot of sense. But then if we go out to sort of the Point Brown area, single family makes sense, especially single family use as transient lodging makes a lot of sense. So as we go right to 17-34020, my first inclination was to strike one family, two family, because I was thinking about that core and say we really need to preserve the ability close to the Gateway District to allow things like professional buildings where Brian's office is, and some of that other stuff, as well as all the existing apartment buildings that are in that corridor. But then you go on the other side. So something to bring up next week and think about on how we want to do this. The only other thing I said was residential garages, carports, private workshops, maybe strike that. Because maybe those aren't appropriate in that area. You know, if you want, if you're gonna do. So just a thought, and we're gonna go through this all again. I want everybody to read and bring it back. And then I went to the next page, 17-34-030, where I struck out the row houses. Because I think we've got enough other opportunities for row houses, and we don't really need them in the B1. Because what happens here is that's where you can take an existing lot under the Commonwealth subdivision row house provision and make a much smaller lot down the middle. Do you have any, before we get into this next week's, Marshall, you want to think about the impacts of saying not in a B1? Marshall?
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. Only because I have one applicant that's looking at a piece of property just for that, and I had to look at this piece of code, either late last week or early this week. I guess it was last week. It's gonna fall into, if we end up changing the other code to allow for these smaller structures to be separate and individual in those areas, as transient rentals, like detached motel units. But that doesn't fall into the Commonwealth, so. Yeah, I don't know what the downside to that's gonna look like.
Yeah.
Maybe
And again,
not.
we're only saying in the B1, and we
Yeah.
continue to leave that in the medium and the high. Where it's
Right,
probably more appropriate. So what we're trying to
Agreed.
we're trying to say is in the B1, we don't want, and I hate to say it, but it's, do you know if the one directly behind the porthole, that brand new one, is gonna be subdivided, or is it gonna stay single owner rental? You know the one I'm talking about?
yeah, that's gonna be single owner, the one across from the. Yeah, I think that's gonna be single owner rental.
On Menard, and so it's kind of, I know it sounds kind of things we need to think about that, and that's a great one to do it. It's on Menard. Almost at the end of Menard, behind the parking for the porthole, shows where I go.
Oh,
for
no,
work.
that has been subdivided.
It has been.
It has been, yeah, it went through a conditional use permit and has since been subdivided for individual ownership.
That new modern one, huh?
Yes,
All right. So then I guess what we need to think about is if we make this change, that wouldn't be permitted in the future. So that's a perfect example. And that's why I want you guys to sort of think about it. If you get a chance to drive by, it's a beautiful building. But I thought it was going to be a nightly rental single owner when it was getting built. Okay. I understand.
no,
Yeah, so if you want to go by and see it, it's actually a very nice building that just got built. As you go Menard heading north, it's right before you intersect with Ocean Shores Boulevard on the left. Yeah, so that's an example. And then there's some other areas, but just, Marshall, we'll talk about that more next week. About what are the pluses and minuses of prohibiting Commonwealth subdivision in the B1 district. And I think we really need to look at the map to see that.
okay,
All right. So I didn't change much else. So we're gonna go on to B2, which is page 28. God, I'm dragging on here, terrible. So basically, and again, this is the first time you guys seen it, I want you to all come back and look at it. Basically, we changed the language for B2 now we're talking about. That says, construction of new residential dwellings shall only be permitted for a period of 2 years after adoption of the ordinance implementing this change, because that's what we had talked about, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So look at that, come back next week and think about it. And that sort of met the concerns of, what if somebody had bought this piece of B2 property and wanted to build their dream home on it, so now they have 2 years to do it. Sort of the idea, or 2 years to basically pull the permit. My gut feeling is if they've got a piece of property in there, they've been already approached by people that want to develop it as transient lodging, so I don't think this is as much of an issue as we're making it, because the B2 has been so filled up with, transient lodging that, we'll do all of that. The other thing I would say is, if you haven't done so, please take a ride through what I'm now calling the checkerboard district, which is basically the area between Point Brown and Marine View. I guess that would be east of Tonkin. Is that the best description of that area?
Yeah, so Silver King Avenue and Wawona.
Yeah.
Yeah, Silver King
south-
Avenue are the two streets that bisect it. And that's where you drive through, where you've got a towing company next to a condo unit, next to a single family home, and then you've got VFW, then you've got, I mean, it's just a mismatch. So that's kind of why we call it that district. So as you're thinking about that, and if you get a chance to go through there, I highly encourage it, not knowing what your weather is going to be there. That's really what we're looking at doing, is protecting the B2 type areas. Because if you read the B2, it's outdoor activity, adult entertainment, and storage. Use of a less attractive nature requiring less visibility are intended for this district. So that's really what the original intent was. Perfect place for storage units, gravel storage. I don't know if Dean's going to continue with his changes in business. But the intent was, I don't want to call it light industry, but those type of things, outdoor storage, indoor storage, and all that sort of stuff, to kind of push them down that end of town. And then all of a sudden, the transient lodging craze hit, and they built houses on all of those lots. So we sort of need to go through all of that. So I think next meeting, as we're looking at this, it'll be a lot of looking at the map, looking back at the code, and then sort of going through that. I didn't want to get into any of that here at this point. And also B3's in there. And we actually had code that was pretty good. So I'd ask everybody to read that and come back ready to talk about that. The only thing I added on the old B3 resort tourist commercial is light commercial activities that are compatible with resort. I got some grammar issues there. And then I added transient rentals, which really is, we've done the resort tourist. If you're not familiar with it, and we'll bring the map in, is basically, we had recommended it sort of in the concept plan. It was the far end down by the jetty on the right, where all the condos and everything are. And then if you take that left turn on Ocean Shores Boulevard going towards the sewage treatment plant, where you've got the jetty on one side and all those multifamilies on the left side, we originally circled that as being resort tourist. Right now it's like R9, high density, but we thought this would allow some commercial activities to get mixed in there if possible. So that's sort of what we had done, but I know it's hard without the map, but we'll sort of look at that with the map next week. So if we figured it out, B1, B2, B3, commercial are all going to be hard. I have not yet drafted, and I haven't yet, but I think after we look at the maps, we'll think more about it, is then we're going to have to then create a new zone, which we're going to say commercial. And that's going to be highly restrictive, no residential. And the plots we're looking at is the secret lot. We can't tell anybody on Ocean Shores Boulevard. We're looking at a piece of land basically between, I hate calling it the old IGA, but we will, or the old ACE and the post office, and then the big lot across from the post office. If you look at undeveloped, commercially attractive pieces of land, there ain't much left in Ocean Shores. So there's an opportunity to look at those, and then what would we consider acceptable activities in that area? Commercial, I know there's been discussion of RV resort, maybe or maybe not, that's appropriate, so we can talk about all of that. And Marshall, my last question before we do this, and you know off the top of your head, what is that piece of property right at the end of Point Brown owned by the Quinault zoned right now? Right across from the marina.
Yeah, thank you.
I believe that's B1.
Okay,
No, it's B2. Excuse me.
okay. So I think when we look at the map, we need to look at that too.
It is B1, sorry. I thought it was the same as the marina. It's not, it's B1.
And that was the dream of a big hotel across the marina complex, right, Thorne? That was the idea?
This one here, the big tract that the Quinault's on there.
Because the dream was someday that would get developed with a brand new marina and a nice resort hotel and all that stuff. That never happened. But that's one of the only large lots of undeveloped land left in town as well. Okay. That's all I had, Mark. It's been a long day and I've talked way too much.
Okay, are there any planning commissioners reports for today?
I got two things.
Okay,
One is legislature was considering allowing restaurants on residential lots. Good job. And the building code new rules that Kerry talked about last week, going to court Friday to delay it. So we'll see.
okay, anyone else?
Take some pressure.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah.
Okay.
Only thing I have to report is the lifts weren't open today because of high winds and we're supposed to get a foot of snow. So they better open tomorrow.
Tomorrow's another day. Is there any public comment in the room?
I just wanted to say one thing when you were talking about self-contained, I was looking at different legal definitions and all of that, and all of them actually state the kitchen, let me pull up real quick, the kitchen, the bathroom. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, and then one of the other definitions that was in, for one of the legal definitions, pull it up here. Self-contained accommodations such as an apartment, have all their own facilities so that a person living there does not have to share rooms such as a kitchen or bathroom with other people. But in legal dictionary and other legal sites that I pulled up, it's all pretty specific. Kitchen, bathroom, living area is what the definition of self-contained is.
Okay.
So that might be language that you would be able to use when Gary was talking about the kitchen, things like that. So.
Anyone else? Any comments from afar? Gary,
Yes.
just kidding.
Yes, I have a couple of comments. The first one is about transient rentals, section K, where you talk about the informational packet. I think for clarification, you should add owner operator, who's going to provide that packet. You do in the previous sentence, state owner operator, so I think you just need to add owner operator in item K. The other one, the other comment I have has to do with the gateway corridor for permitted use. You have a lumber yard in there. I don't consider that applicable for the gateway corridor. I understand there's one there already, but I don't think that a lumber yard is consistent with the gateway corridor, and I think you should reconsider that. Other than that, that's all I have for today. Thank you.
Okay, our next meeting will be on March 12th, 2024, at 2 p.m. in the library building in which we're in. Tom, you would take notes next time?
I guess.
Appreciate it. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion?
And a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Approved. We are adjourned as of 3:31.